is insider from The Athletic, our friend of the show, Bruce Feldman here on Off the Bench. Bruce, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, guys. How you doing?
Doing good.
Doing well. It was good seeing you Saturday.
Yeah, it
Bruce.
was great to see you Saturday. Let's start with the Aranda stuff. What's the latest?
The latest from talking to sources involved in that is that I'm told he will not be the next head coach at UNLV. So they were in conversations. They reported that yesterday and kind of examining everything about the job. And keep in mind, Dave Aranda, as you guys know, is making $2.5 million per year. That's way, way, way more than UNLV pays for a head coach. And so there was real interest, but at the end of the day, I'm told he's not going to be the head coach when UNLV does hire somebody very soon.
Bruce, I explained in the first hour, it was very similar, in my opinion, to Jimbo Fisher, Kirby Smart, even a guy like Bob Stoops, who understands that they have the interest and they can kind of wait around for a job that they can hand select. Does Aranda have that reputation, that type of power in this situation?
He's well respected, no doubt. I think he has 3 Mountain West jobs that are open right now. I think UNLV is probably the third best of the 3. Colorado State, you have Fresno State now that came open last week, and also UNLV. Remember, he's a West Coast guy. I think there's a lot of people who have not just respect for him. They feel like he's a guy that he will create some buzz. I mean, he's got obviously an understated personality, but his reputation in the business, I think, is really, really strong. And people look at it and go, well, it's just a matter of time before Dave gets his shot. And look, a lot of guys, and I think he's in this category, would love to run their own program someday. But the money LSU is paying him right now at 2.5, he would take a massive pay cut to do that at one of these jobs. Now, it's not to say that a year from now, when we expect there probably will be a bigger, more action on the coaching carousel at the end of 2020 season, that there probably won't be better jobs out there that probably would be paying more than that. So it's just a matter of timing, I think, at this point.
And so something that we kind of explored in hour number 1, Bruce, was this idea that it's interesting when you look at some of the coordinators, the great coordinators in the SEC that have bided their time, whether it's like a Kirby getting the Georgia job, Jimbo eventually going to Florida State, getting that job. Like, does it feel like Aranda, will he ever be able to make the jump straight to one of those bigger jobs? I mean, we do live in a world where Mizzou just played Eli Drinkwitz $4 million to be their head coach.
Yeah, T-Bob, I think it comes back to just the timing piece. You look at some of the guys in Missouri's case, I think the guy they just fired was a first-time head coach who was a defensive coordinator, and that's usually not something that you follow somebody in a similar type. And so whether it's Alex Grinch, who's the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma, has a lot of ties at Mizzou, or Dave Aranda, I think you see people maybe, all right, we're going to take the guy who was the sitting head coach somewhere and be more in line with that than somebody who's going to be the first-time head coach. It's just quirky how that works. That doesn't mean, if somebody else, it's just like how the timing of these cycles, I think. And it's as much that as anything. And I think, look, Dave Aranda, I think, can be choosy because he knows he's on a program right now that's the hottest thing in football at this point. So I think from that side of it, I think he doesn't have to run from something. He's basically got to see if he wants to really run to something.
Talking to Bruce Feldman of The Athletic here on Off the Bench, 104.5, 100.3, 94.7 ESPN. I'm going to ask you an impossible question here. What happens from this moment on? Like, do you think just because of the timing of all this and how coaching firings and hirings work, is Dave Aranda, do you feel like pretty confident now that he will be back at LSU next season?
I would think so. I mean, there's obviously, I don't know that. I mean, the Colorado State search looked like it was going in a different direction. Fresno State, I thought, was going to end up with Kalen DeBoer, who had been there on Jeff Tedford's staff and done a really good job at Indiana. There's a lot of support for him. So I don't think Dave would just take a job to take a job. Like I said, I think he knows I'm in a really good situation. Everything I've heard is that his family likes it there. I know that they really value him, and there's a lot of strong relationships in there. So, all signs are pointing to that, but who knows? These things are so fluid.
Yeah.
Or something else there could be another job that could open up a head coaching vacancy. And I'm not saying I know one that's on the horizon, but at this point, it looks like he's going to be with LSU longer.
New York Times best-selling author. He's also a reporter over at Fox Sports 1, FS1, and a writer over at The Athletic. He's on Twitter at Bruce Feldman, CFB. Feldman joining us here on Off the Bench. You saw Lane Kiffin get the job in Oxford. What was your reaction?
It's good for us in the media.
Yeah.
It's definitely good for you guys. It's good for the writers because he makes it more interesting, and he is a brash personality. And I think with him, I don't know if it's great for Greg Sankey, running the SEC, but he will stir it up. And I think people maybe overlook this, but Lane is a really good coach. He's a really good play caller. He did a really good job. I wasn't sure how this was going to go, and in his 3 years at FAU, if I was an FAU person, I'd be elated at the job he did, and whatever time you got with him, he elevated that program and he elevated the brand of FAU football. But now you're in the deep end of the pool. Now you're back in the SEC West. I'm curious to see what happens here because he's going to stir it up, and I think he's going to stir it up probably at the expense of everybody, most notably the folks in Tuscaloosa. Yes. And I would expect to see him do that right away. And it's going to be interesting. It was interesting to see him at his press conference. And all these coaches are gambles. Let's not kid ourselves. But this is certainly a big, I think it's a high risk, high reward hire, and we'll see how he did. But if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I'm very interested to see what he can do with this job now and where he's at, because I do think he's matured some, but he's still Lane Kiffin at the same time. So I think that part of it is what keeps us kind of watching him, and he knows that, and he's good at milking that spotlight.
Frank Wilson's on the market. Where do you believe he lands?
I would have thought it would have been like one of three places. LSU would find a spot for him in some way because it's home, and Ed Ogeron was the first one to give him a chance in college football. I'm sure Nick Saban would love to make a splashy hire and help pump some life back, not back into his program, but back into Alabama. Or there's the possibility of him taking an NFL job because he's done all the other things. If I was Lane Kiffin, I would try to hire Frank Wilson. They work together, certainly at Tennessee.
Would you make him the OC? Because Lane's going to call the plays, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Now I don't know if Frank wants to move back to Oxford, but he was at Ole Miss for 3 years, and then Lane hired him in Knoxville. He knows the SEC well. He is a great recruiter, and I think Lane would probably love to kind of needle probably the cherry on top is he'd probably love to needle his two buddies who are coaching colleagues in the SEC West, who he knows probably really want Frank.
Bruce, so that's kind of the Kiffin breakdown. What about these other SEC hires, Drinkwitz and Pittman? What did you think about them?
Drinkwitz, I think, look, he hit a bad gaffe yesterday at his press conference, sneaking in Sunbelt when he went SEC East.
That'll live on forever.
Yeah, and it will. But he did really well in his first year as a head coach at App State. Now that was a really good job, positioned well. From the people I've talked to who've worked with him, both at App State now and also at NC State, they are really high on him. And they said he's very prepared. He is very, very smart. He's a good offensive mind. I think that's probably about as good a hire as Missouri could make in the wake of what they were dealing with.
Wow.
I don't know if he's going to hit it out of the park, but they needed to hire an offensive guy. He's a sitting head coach, but he's never really spent. This is a different opportunity. At App State, he was taking over the program that was built to run through that conference. at Missouri. He's not taking over Georgia and Florida in the SEC East, and he's definitely not taking over, a heavyweight program in there. So, but I do think they can sell him. On the Sam Pittman side, I have no idea how that's going to work out. But I do say this: I don't think if Ed Orgeron is not on top of the college football world right now, I don't know if Arkansas goes out and hires a line coach. Like some of the things, and I think you can see it. It's like, okay, we know players love him, and he's a great line coach. But I think there's a lot of people who would get stuck on, well, he's never been a coordinator, and they just put him in a box. And I think at the end of the day, one of the things that people are starting to realize, and it's not to say Sam Pittman's going to go in there and revitalize Arkansas football, and they're going to win the SEC West anytime soon. But I do think people look at it and go, okay, can he get players to play? Can he get players to come there? Can he get players to play hard? How will he treat them? Will he have them? And ultimately, to me, this is the most important thing about being a college football coach. How ready can you get them on Saturdays? The X and O's is great, but I think ultimately it's that piece of it. And if Sam Pittman can accomplish what's a little of what's been accomplished in Baton Rouge, I think that's why they have some optimism about him as opposed to, a bunch of the other guys they looked at.
Last one, Bruce. You spent a week around the program as they were gearing up for the SEC title game. You're as close to Ed Orgeron as anybody in the business. He's got the best assistant coach in the country in Joe Brady. What's the future of Brady in Baton Rouge?
I think they're going to keep him. I mean, he knows that they gave him a chance when nobody else was open to, was looking at him or even considering it. LSU can pay a lot of money. I know LSU's paying Dave Aranda and other people money, but think about the money that is going to flow into that program now.
Yeah. Checkbooks are open.
Yeah, oh my God. LSU football is the hottest thing in football right now. It is on a different level right now, at least in terms of the way recruits are looking at it in the SEC, especially after the butt kicking in Georgia the other night. So I think, there's an opportunity there. And I think Joe Brady knows he's 30. This is his first really year of doing this. Time is on his side. I mean, if anybody were to offer him a head coaching job at this point in college, I think it's probably, people know it's probably in his best interest to spend a couple more years at this level, doing what he's doing, learning from Ensminger, learning from Orgeron, learning from the people who are also in that program with a lot of years in it, because you jump in the middle of something. Look, I remember seeing Cliff Kingsbury when Johnny Manziel took off and won the Heisman, and Cliff got a big job, or a pretty big job, at Texas Tech, and he wasn't ready for it, and it didn't work out great. Now he eventually parlayed it into the Arizona Cardinals, but there were some big growing pains along the way. And by the way, Cliff had been in the NFL as a player. Yeah. Cliff had
with the Saints.
Been a former star player. Yeah, so I think there's some elements, some parallels, but I think Joe knows, and Joe's, much younger than Cliff was at that point. So I think at this point, just you got this great group of receivers. You got a lot of recruits who want to come play, and my guess is LSU's going to pay him a fortune, and I think he's going to continue to develop in Baton Rouge. And I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of quarterbacks who are going to want to come in and say, hey, I would love to be a grad transfer and play for Steve Ensminger and Joe Brady and play with those receivers in that offense.
Bruce, thank you for your time as always, man. Excellent work.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, there is. Bruce Feldman checking in this morning on OTB. The Cliff Kingsbury stories around the Saints when he was there, legendary.